Thanks for your company here on Saturday Agenda. We're going to turn our attention now to Iraq and the fight against terrorism in the Middle East and here at home. My guests today, Matt Thistlethwaite, the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary, and Andrew Laming, Liberal MP, joining us from Brisbane. Thank you both very much for your time today.
Morning,
the British Parliament has voted overwhelmingly, mind you, in favour of airstrikes in Iraq. Andrew Laming, first to you, why didn't we in Australia have a vote in Parliament?
Well, we're obviously working with our coalition partners, and the decision in Australia is made by the Security Council, which then is taken to Cabinet. That's how it works, and I have no problem with that system. But it's interesting with the British vote that we have roughly a 91–92% vote in favour of that action, but still some caution in fringe elements of their House of Commons. So there was a good litmus test for the UK. Australia's already involved, and of course further advances and further involvement from Australia, of course, runs through the same Australian system, which is through advice from the Security Council.
Matt Thistlethwaite, such a weighty decision, and it looks all but made for us to launch airstrikes in Iraq and to send in Special Forces troops. Should this have been debated? Should it have gone to a vote in this country?
Well, David, Labor makes decisions based on what's in Australia's best interests and the interests of our Defence Force personnel. We're comfortable with the process of the Security Committee of Cabinet and the executive level of government making these decisions. It's a decision that Labor, so it's a principle that Labor has had since Federation. So we're comfortable with that process. I might also add that there have been, really since Afghanistan and Labor's position of regular briefs and updates to the Parliament, and it's good to see that that's occurring with respect to what's happening in Iraq with this government. So there is some accountability to the Parliament, but Labor's comfortable with the process of the executive level of government making those decisions.
We've also seen, and how related this is, I'm interested to see both your thoughts, these attacks in Australia. Of course, the tragic case in Melbourne, a man who stabbed two police officers, was shot dead, and also a number of other incidents where people have been assaulted or insulted or graffiti, or, you know, we had the one case where the Defence Force, the Navy sailor, actually pulled back his claim that he was attacked on terrorism reasons. Andrew Laming, is this an inevitable consequence of our decision to really actively engage in the fight against Islamic State, as necessary as that fight is?
Well, it's a little hard to get into the minds of every single crazy despot in every corner of the country, David, but look, Australians in general are wanting to make sure that nothing that goes on here will turn us against the massive majority of people of Islamic faith that have no part of this extreme action. We want to make sure that the media coverage and the hype doesn't lead to any sensitisation and people on either side doing stupid things. And my message to Australians is hold firm, let's be one as Australians, and let's make sure that if there is any attempt at coordination of these kind of activities, leave that to the intelligence agencies. And if there's obviously one or two absolutely, crazy radicalised people, there's very little that a nation can do except trust its intelligence services to intervene and to snuff these out as quickly as possible.
Matt Thistlethwaite, Muslim leaders have raised concerns about the potential for a Cronulla-style riot. Have you seen any evidence of that sort of level of tension on the streets?
I don't believe there's a correlation between our involvement in the circumstances in Iraq and the situation that we saw, the tragic shooting of the young boy the other day. And I think Bill Shorten's speech in the Parliament the day after that tragic incident was really good, in that he highlighted the fact that there's a family in Melbourne that are grieving the loss of a young son who had his whole life ahead of him, and we need to ask the question why. Why would someone in that position take that sort of action? And I think that there's a role for leadership from the government, from the leaders of our community, to say that people like that have a position within our community. We need to be doing all that we can to ensure that young men in particular aren't becoming radicalised by extremist views, and programs such as the ones that Labor put in place to reduce violent extremism within communities, to work with the leaders of the Islamic community in particular and identify individuals and divert them down more mainstream paths are very important.
Andrew Laming, what about some of your colleagues, like, for example, Corey Bernardi, Dean Smith, who have been talking about the burqa and whether it should be banned? Jackie Lambie is also, obviously not of your party, but she's hoping to put in a private member's bill to have this banned. Is that helpful at this time?
Look, I guess it's pretty hard to be telling any member of the nation's parliament about timing of issues, but I'd definitely be on the side of saying that at the moment it's about emphasising national unity. So, of course, I'm not going to be preventing any debate, but it's also terribly unhelpful to have people telling others when and when they can't raise issues. You've got to take them prima facie, face value. If people want to raise those debates, that's their democratic right. It's what they're elected to do. But obviously you can see there's a fair amount of support on both sides of the chambers that this really isn't the time to discuss it, David.
What's your view on the burqa? Should it be banned?
Of course not.
And Matt Thistlethwaite, what's your view of those elements, and small as they are, within the coalition that are pushing for this at this time?
Well, comments such as these are incredibly divisive, and they stoke the fires of hatred, and that of course can lead to violence, and that is the last thing that we need in Australian society and in our wider community at the moment with the tension in the wider world. What we really need, David, is good leadership. You need good leadership to stamp out these sort of comments before they take hold. These sort of comments can begin as a spark and spread like wildfire, creating tension and hatred throughout the community. We need good, strong leadership to put these comments to bed, and unfortunately, I must say, we haven't had that from Tony Abbott and the likes of the leadership of the Liberal Party on this issue. The other point, I think, is you need to question the motives of those that are making these comments, and I think they're all about a cheap headline and gaining some national notoriety for these sort of comments, and the best thing for us to do is to completely ignore them.
I'll get you to respond to that, Andrew Laming, the claim that we haven't seen strong leadership from Tony Abbott and others.
Look, of course, people have found Tony Abbott's international relations leadership over the last few months astounding. I think that would just be an Abbott Labor claim from Matt, but you'd expect that from him. Look, in reality, I think the general direction to identify where there are areas of concern for radicalisation and working in those communities is pretty important. And my sense is that the group we're dealing with are almost exclusively young males, mostly disengaged from economic activity. Many of them have very little work. If they are working, it's in the informal sector. And raising, opportunities and letting them recognise that there's an Australian future for them that's a positive one and prosperous one, that's the great challenge. So addressing the 20% plus youth unemployment areas of our major cities really is the starting point as I see it.
I want to change tack now to the Cambodia refugee deal that has been signed overnight. The Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison, was in Phnom Penh. It's received criticism from some pretty high circles, including the UNHCR, which has said it's a worrying departure from international norms and hopes that the Australian government will reconsider its approach. Andrew Laming, I can't imagine any chance that the Australian government will reconsider. What's your response to that sort of criticism?
Well, the only worrying element from the UNHCR's point of view, of course, is they've never ever seen a nation take control of its borders again and actually stop what typically is a flow of people that most nations, except Australia up to this point, have never succeeded in halting. This is icing on the cake for Scott Morrison. It demonstrates our partnerships within the region. We regard Cambodia and other nations as an equal. They are signatories to the convention. This is precisely what we need to be doing, moving people from unsafe areas of the world to safe areas of the world, and not having xenophobic, patronising attitudes towards our northern neighbours simply because they're part of this solution.
Matt, Labor's been critical of this deal, but how is it any worse than the deal that Labor wanted to put in place with Malaysia?
Well, firstly, David, it's been done under the veil of secrecy. We found out about this through the Cambodian media. No accountability to the Parliament whatsoever for what is a significant expenditure of taxpayers' money. This is a bad deal in that it appears that we're going to be paying upwards of $1 million per transferee. Cambodia have said they'll initially only take 4 or 5 refugees, and that's an awful deal in terms of the money that Australia is going to pay for these transfers. What's the difference with Malaysia? Why were they opposed to Malaysia some years ago, but now they're saying Cambodia is okay? The difference with Malaysia, from our perspective, is that it was negotiated in concert with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. There were work rights, there were health rights that transferees had, and we were taking. We were talking about 800 refugees being transferred. This is 3 or 4. It's a bad deal for Australia.
Andrew Laming, we've only got 30 seconds left for you to respond to that.
I can dismantle that in about 15. I mean, Malaysia wasn't at the time a signatory to the convention. It was swapping decks of hands for 4 of our refugees for 1 of yours. It was never going to fix the problem, and it was a pre-election stunt. So at every level it wasn't supported by the coalition, and rightly so.
Andrew Laming, Matt Thistlethwaite, appreciate that. Great to have you on the program. And thanks for your company
David.
at home. This was Saturday Agenda. Enjoy your day.